When the Korean Mafia boss walked in, the divorce papers were already on her hospital blanket. His wife was still pregnant and had an IV in her arm. Her lips were very light. She was weak all over. But his voice was colder than the machines that were keeping her alive. "Sign it," he said, not looking at the tears in her eyes. He didn't know that the baby he was throwing away wasn't just one, 3. The white walls of the Seoul Grand Medical Center had never felt so tight before. Han Seo-yeon lay on the narrow hospital bed, her fingers shaking against the thin cotton blanket. There was a purple and ugly bruise growing on her cheekbone, and her left wrist was wrapped in gauze where the nurse had put the IV catheter in twice before getting it right. The IV line in her arm dripped steadily, like a metronome that kept her alive. A kid was crying somewhere down the hall. A monitor beeped out a rhythm that didn't match her own heart somewhere nearby. 3 hours earlier, she had been at the Kang family banquet, a big party to celebrate her husband's most recent business success. She wore a light blue hanbok and had her hair pinned back with the jade ornament her mother gave her on her wedding day. Madame Kang's cold stares didn't make her stop smiling. She had put up with Yoon Ji-a's sharp, elegant compliments, which only hurt after the speaker left. And then, between the second course and the third toast, the marble stairs had given way under her feet. She remembered the time she fell, the scream that came out of her throat. The small hands of a woman pushed her down. They were flat between her shoulder blades at the same time her foot found the loose step. She remembered the pain, which was sharp and low in her stomach, where her baby lived. She put her free hand on her stomach and whispered to the small life inside her while she lay in the hospital bed. "Please stay with me. Please stay with me." The door swung open. She looked up, thinking her husband would be there. She thought Kang Min-jae would come in with that rare, unguarded panic that only she ever saw. She thought he would hold her hand and tell her she was safe. She thought he would ask about the baby. 3 men in black suits came in first, though. Attorneys. Their shoes didn't make any noise on the tile, which somehow made the moment worse. Madame Kang came up behind them. Her silver hair was pinned back, and her face looked like it was made of stone. Yoon Ji-a was behind her. She was wearing cream silk, and her lips were the same color as the wine Seo-yeon used to wear on their anniversary. And finally, Kang Min-jae, her spouse, the mafia boss of Seoul that people are afraid of. The man who had once carried her over the threshold of their apartment and whispered in her ear that he would burn the world before he let her cry. He didn't look at her. He walked to the end of the bed, where his long black coat hung behind him like a shadow. He put a stack of papers on the blanket that was covering her legs. The papers felt heavier than they should have, as if the weight of 12 years was pushing them down. She whispered, "Kang Min-jae." Her voice broke. "What is this?" He didn't say anything. He pointed to the lawyer who came forward and opened a file. Pictures, records from the bank, text messages on screenshots that were printed. Seo-yeon felt like the floor of the hospital had dropped out from under her as the lawyer read a list of accusations in a flat, clinical voice. Shipping routes that got out. Names of faithful men. Accounts in banks in other countries. Conversations with the rival Bayek syndicate, with dates and times, and signed under usernames she had never made. "No," she said softly. "No, that's not. I never—" Min-jae said, "Last night, 2 of my men died." He spoke softly. He still wasn't looking at her. "Because a member of this family told the Beck where our trucks would be, that person had access that only a wife would have." "Min-jae, please look at me. Someone pushed me tonight. I felt hands on the stairs." "That's enough." The word hurt her more than the fall did. "Min-jae, please pay attention to me." He stared at her, and for one horrible second, she saw the man she had married. She saw the boy who had told her before that his mother couldn't choose his heart. She saw the husband who had cried when she told him she was pregnant, and promised that no child of his would ever be afraid. Then the second passed, and the stone came back to his face. "Put your name on it," he said. "Sign the divorce, and I'll let you go with your head held high." She said, "The baby." "Min-jae, our little one. He said, "That child has nothing to do with me anymore." The room was quiet. The heart monitor even seemed to stop working. Seoyeon's eyes moved past him to Yoon Jia, who was standing by the door with a small, sad smile that looked like she was trying to be sad. There was a thin, white gold bracelet with a single pearl on Jia's wrist. Seoyeon's wristband. The one Minjae gave her for their first anniversary. The one that had been in her jewelry box for 2 days. Then she got it. Not everything. But that's enough. She grabbed the pen. It was hard for her to hold because her hand was shaking so much. A single tear fell from her cheek and landed on the top page of the divorce contract. This made the ink bleed. A second drop, this one darker red, fell from the gauze on her wrist and stained the line where she signed. She put her name on it. Seoyeon Han. 3 letters. Love for 12 years. Gone. Minjae picked up the paper. He didn't fold it carefully. He gave it to his lawyer, turned around, and left without looking back. As soon as the door shut, the heart monitor went up. Seoyeon held her stomach and felt like fire was spreading through it. A nurse came in quickly. Then a doctor came in. He was a young man with kind eyes and a nameplate that said Choi Hyun-woo. "Stay with me, Mrs. Kang," he said quickly as he looked at the monitor. "Slow down, breathe." "Please," she whispered, and the word was hard to hear. "Please. Save my babies." Dr. Choi stopped moving. "Babies?" he asked. "Mrs. Kang, did you say babies?" Her eyes rolled back. The monitor yelled. Kang Minjae stopped outside the door for exactly 1 second, which is 1 heartbeat longer than a man walking away should have stopped. Then he disappeared down the hall. Dr. Choi Hyun-woo had helped many women give birth during his 6 years at Seoul Grand. He had seen every kind of sadness and happiness, but he had never seen a woman thrown away so easily, so publicly, and with so little mercy in all his life. He made her stable. He told them to do the ultrasound. 3 small heartbeats pulsed back at him from the screen, stubborn and alive. He just stared at it in silence. 3. Brotherly. 3 separate sacs. 3 separate placentas, and 3 separate lives for 2 boys and a girl. They were all holding on to a mother who had just been told she was alone in the world. A pregnancy with a lot of risks. Bleeding that wasn't completely stopped yet. A bruise on his cheekbone that didn't come from any stairs he had ever seen. He went out into the hallway to calm down. The corridor was empty except for the soft buzz of the fluorescent lights. He was about to go back when he heard people talking around the corner. Not much. Very sharp. Well known. She signed, "It's done." "Yoon Jia? Don't be stupid, girl." Madam Kang's voice got even lower. "She's not dead. She can still talk. The evidence you planted is smart, but smart things break. Then we'll make sure she doesn't get the chance. A break." The nurse on the night shift, Jia, went on. "She owes me. Just a small change to the IV. Nothing that can be traced back to me. The hospital will say it was complications from the fall." Dr. Choi pressed himself against the wall, and his heart was beating so loudly that he was sure they could hear it. "How about the child?" Madam Kang asked. She took it and cleaned it. The 2 women walked away, and the sound of their heels on the tile was soft. For a whole minute, Dr. Choi didn't move. He finally did. And he walked, not ran, back to Seoyeon's room, checked her IV, and unplugged it with steady hands. He took the saline bag out of his own locked cabinet and put it in its place. He put a fake note in her chart. He called a trusted co-worker in Busan, a woman named Dr. Im, who had owed him a favor since medical school, and set up a transfer under a fake name. He told the night nurse, whose name he now knew was Jia's Pocket, that Mrs. Kang had been moved to a private facility in the north for specialized trauma care. Han Seoyeon left Seoul at 2 in the morning in the back of an unmarked ambulance. She didn't know it yet, but she was never going to return. Not as Kang Min-jae's wife, not as the woman who had given up her life on a hospital blanket. She would return as something completely different. Kang Min-jae stood at the window of his penthouse above the city with a glass of whiskey in his hand and watched as the lights of Seoul turned into gold. He didn't drink. He stayed still. There was a copy of the divorce papers on the desk behind him. They still had a drop of blood and a drop of tears on them. Lee Do-han, his oldest and most loyal aide, stood by the door. He carefully cleared his throat. "Boss, the hospital called. She has been moved." "To where?" "She chose a private place." For a long time, Min-jae didn't say anything. "Okay," he finally said. "Then it's over." Min-jae walked over to the desk and put his palm flat against the papers after Do-han left. He looked at the blood stain. He looked at the tear stain. He looked at the signature, which was still, in some way, the most beautiful handwriting he had ever seen. And for the first time in 10 years, Kang Min-jae felt something cold and strange crawl up his back. Doubt. He pushed it down. He drank all of the whiskey. He got into bed. He thought she was guilty. He said it to himself for 3 years. Busan, a city on the coast, smelled like salt and rain. Dr. Im worked in a small clinic that was hidden away in a quiet neighborhood. The windows were fogged up with sea mist. Seo-yeon lay in bed upstairs, where her pregnancy was checked on every day. Her world was limited to a narrow bed and a single window that looked out over gray water. She didn't talk for weeks. She hardly ate. Dr. Im was a kind woman in her 50s who didn't ask questions or expect thanks. She just brought soup. She just checked the heartbeats. She kept saying, "Your babies are strong." In the stillness of that room, something inside Seo-yeon began to change. The gentle wife who had signed the papers without a fight was dying. Something tougher was being born in her place. Something that didn't care about shadows. Something that could stay underwater for a long, long time without breathing. A mom. She stopped crying after 3 weeks. In the 4th, she began to eat. By the 5th, she was walking the length of the hallway twice a day, always with one hand on the small curve of her stomach and counting steps like other women counted prayers. Seo-yeon went into labor 7 months into her pregnancy, in the middle of a thunderstorm that shook the windows and roof. The lights went out. The power stayed on. Dr. Im yelled orders, and the nurse cried. Seo-yeon screamed through pain so bad it felt like death. Dr. Im said through gritted teeth, "You need strength," as he pressed a cool cloth to Seo-yeon's forehead. Not just for one child, for 3. Seo-yeon held on to the bed's metal rail. She remembered Kang Min-jae's face when he told her that the child was no longer his problem. She remembered Jia's bracelet. She remembered the blood drop on the divorce paper. She pushed. At 3:17 a.m., the first cry came, a kid. The second one is at 3:24. A different boy. The third one is at 3:31. A girl, the smallest of the 3, had a full head of dark hair and cried like she was mad at the whole world for making her wait. Seo-yeon cried without making a sound as Dr. Im put each one against her chest. She whispered Junseo to the first one, brave and good-looking. She whispered to the second, Min-soo, kind, yes. She whispered to the third, Harin. Rain in the summer. The storm stopped outside. The water turned gray and silver at dawn. Seo-yeon shut her eyes and made 3 vows. 1. These kids would never ask a man to be their father. 2. She would never go back to the Kang family unless the truth made her do it. 3. She would raise them with respect, not hate. She kept all 3 of them for almost 3 years. She changed her name in the neighborhood to Hanseo-ra, which was a small change that was easy to remember and easier to live with. The only important documents were the birth certificates, which were sealed and kept in a safe in Dr. Im's office. Her legal name stayed on them. She moved to a neighborhood where no one knew her. She got a job in a small library for kids on the 2nd floor of a building that smelled like old paper and cinnamon tea. The 3 kids got bigger. Junseo didn't say anything. He looked at the world with sharp, careful eyes. When the other kids at the playground yelled, he just tilted his head and watched, as if he were trying to figure something out. He had the same steady, calculating look in his father's eyes, which made him look older than he was. When he was 2, he looked up at his mom while she was folding clothes and said, "Mommy, you're pretending to be fine." She didn't know what to say. She kissed the top of his head and folded the shirt she was holding into a shape that was new to her. Minsu was the other way around. He held on to his mother's skirt, cried when she left the room, and brought her a bunch of wildflowers he picked from the cracks in the sidewalk. He was the one who would put his small hand on her cheek when she thought no one was watching and say, "Mommy, you're sad today." He always knew what was going on. He was the second and smallest boy born, and a quiet part of him had never forgotten how fragile that first breath was. The storm was Harin, brave, talkative, and not afraid of anything. When she was 2, she climbed the library's bookshelf. When she was 3, she told a stranger in the market that his hair looked bad. The old women in the neighborhood laughed until they cried because of her. She also slept with the old hospital bracelet Seo-yeon had worn the night the divorce was signed every night, even though no one had told her what it was or where it came from. Seo-yeon kept the bracelet, the original ultrasound, and a copy of the divorce papers in a small wooden box under the floorboards of her bedroom. She didn't look at the box very often, but she didn't get rid of it. Kang Min-jae got colder in a tower that scraped the sky over Seoul. His empire grew. His enemies fell. People in 3 cities whispered his name in fear. He bought businesses. He beat his enemies. He lived through an assassination attempt in the 2nd year and killed the man who tried to kill him with his own hands. But he didn't marry Ji-ah. Madame Kang pushed him. Ji-ah waited, calm and graceful, with her claws covered in silk. The wedding, the kids, and the picture of a stable Mafia dynasty with a beautiful bride on its arm were all part of the political alliance they had planned. And Min-jae, who had every reason to move forward, kept finding reasons to put it off. He told himself it was work. He kept telling himself that he was waiting for the right time. He told himself that the empty chair at his table was a sign of discipline, not a lack of it. Lee Do-han came into the office without warning one night and found his boss sitting in the dark, staring at an old piece of paper with a blood stain on the signature line. Do-han acted like he hadn't seen. For a long time, he acted like he was. In the 2nd year, Min-jae hired a private investigator to find the woman who used to be his wife. The tracker had nothing to show for his work. Seoul had taken her in. Busan had lost track of her. The hospital didn't have any record of her leaving. The paperwork for the transfer led to a building that had been closed for 10 years. Min-jae didn't know. He wouldn't know for another year that Do-han had quietly taken 2 of the tracker's leads and buried them. Do-han had never believed the evidence against Han Seo-yeon in the 20 years he had been on the job. Min-jae had told himself that he was glad she couldn't be found. Some nights, when the whiskey ran low, he almost believed it. It was a spring Tuesday when everything started to move. Seo-yeon was putting away the laundry on the low table in the living room. Harin sat on the floor next to her with a pile of newspapers and magazines that the neighbor from downstairs had brought up that morning. She was a happy old lady who collected them for the recycling bin and always saved the ones with the best pictures for Harin. Harin liked the photos. She turned the page. She stopped moving. "Mommy," she said, and her voice sounded strange. "Mommy, why does that guy look like Jun Seo?" At first, Seo-yeon didn't look up. "Which man, honey?" "This one. On the page." Seo-yeon looked away. The world came to a stop. There was a picture of Kang Min-jae in a black tuxedo on the shiny page. It was under a headline that said, "Seoul's most powerful wedding of the year." Yoon Ji-ah stood next to him, looking beautiful in cream silk. Underneath them, the date was printed in big letters. 3 weeks from now. Seo-yeon's hand started to shake. "That's not Jun Seo, baby," she said softly. "That man is from far away." Harin turned her head. "His eyes are like Jun Seo's." Jun Seo stood in the doorway, holding a glass of water in his small hand, but no one saw him. He glanced at the magazine. He turned to his mother. He didn't say anything. That night, though, he learned something, like a quiet child does, and he didn't let go of it. Min-soo got sick that same week. It started with a fever. It got worse. He was in the pediatric ward of the nearest hospital within 3 days. Dr. Im, who had delivered him, was frowning over his chart with a seriousness that made Seo-yeon's blood run cold. Dr. Im said softly, "It's a rare blood condition. Yes, it can be treated. But the treatment he needs depends on finding a donor with a high compatibility level, preferably a direct paternal HLA match. Without it, the success rate drops to 30%. With it, we're looking at 85%. Seo-yeon stayed very still. How much time does he have? Months, but we have to act now. That night, she went home, sat on the floor of her bedroom, and took the wooden box out from under the floorboard. With hands that wouldn't stop shaking, she opened it. The paperwork for the divorce, the ultrasound test, the bracelet from the hospital. And under everything else was a plain brown envelope that she hadn't been able to open in 2 years. One summer morning, it came through the mail slot with no return address or stamp. Inside were a memory card, a folded note, and a picture of Dr. Choi Hyun-woo standing outside a hospital on a rainy street. The note, which he had written carefully, said, "Hey, Mrs. Kang, I had to leave the country if you're reading this. I don't feel safe because someone has been asking about me. This card has everything I could find. The attack was planned. The proof against you was made up. I'm sorry I couldn't do more." Choi. She had only read the note once. She had put it back in the envelope. She had put it in the box and locked it. She was too scared to open the card. Min-jae still chose to believe she was guilty even though the card showed she was innocent. She would have to do something with the names on the card if it named names. If the card told the truth, she would have to do something about it. But she had 3 tiny heartbeats in her arms and no money, no army, no power, and no name. She had waited, though. She had been waiting for 2 years. She was done waiting tonight, with Min-soo burning in a hospital crib 3 blocks away. She put the card into her old laptop. There were files with videos. 3 years ago, a video from a hospital hallway shows Yoon Jia going into a supply closet with a nurse and coming out with a small white object. There were audio recordings, like a phone call with Jia's voice talking to someone about the leak in the shipping route. When she's gone, the evidence burns with her. There were records from the bank, moving money from a shell company in Jia's name to a man with a criminal record. A picture of the marble staircase at the Kang banquet hall showed the damage on the step where she had fallen, with a red circle around it. Dr. Choi's note said that the step had been cut before the party, not after. Seo-yeon saw everything. She saw it again. She closed the laptop, walked to the window, and looked out at the gray sky in the afternoon. She said out loud, in a voice that didn't shake, 3 weeks. She didn't go to ask for money. She didn't go for love. She went for 3 reasons: to save her son's life, to tell the truth, and to bury the lie that had tried to bury her. She spent the next few weeks getting ready with a calmness that scared her. She called a lawyer, a woman named Park Jin-ae, who had once defended a woman against a powerful family and won. The director of the children's library had recommended her. Park didn't say anything while the story was being told. He just said, "I will need copies of everything, and I need you to promise me one thing. When the cameras come, you won't flinch." Seo-yeon made a promise. She gave the memory card to him. She filled out forms. She made legal petitions and paternity affidavits. She made 3 copies of the birth certificates, and the originals were still clean and true, under the legal name she had never erased. She called the hospital where Min-soo was, and gave them permission to take a paternal sample from any donor who matched. She didn't say whose. She got a dress. Not white, not black. A dark navy blue like the color of the sea at night. Easy. Stylish. The dress of a woman who had lived. She bought 3 small clothes for the triplets. Nothing showy. Not like a storybook. Soft, tidy, and respectable. She didn't tell the kids where they were going until the morning of. She sat the three of them down on the small couch in the living room and looked each of them in the eye on the morning of the wedding. "Today," she said softly, "we're going somewhere important. There will be a lot of people, cameras, and maybe even yelling. I need you to stay close to me. Don't be scared. I won't let anything happen to you." "Is it him?" Junseo asked, as she knew he would. Seoyeon's throat got tight. "Who is who, sweetheart?" "The guy from the magazine." She shut her eyes for a second. After that, she opened them. "Yes," she said. "It's him." Min-soo, who was still pale from being released from the hospital for the weekend, said with fierce eyes, "Is he a bad man, Mommy?" Seoyeon thought about this question very carefully. "He made a terrible choice," she said. "But today isn't about him. Today is about the truth. Do you get it?" They nodded their heads. Harin asked, "Mommy, are we really going to meet our dad?" "As expected." Seoyeon kissed her daughter's head. She said, "No, my love. Today, he learns the truth." There was a palace of gold and crystal in the grand hall of the Silla Seoul. There were chandeliers the size of small cars hanging from the vaulted ceiling. There were white orchids from Thailand all over the aisle. 200 people sat in velvet rows that were stacked on top of each other. They were senators, businessmen, and heads of rival groups who had been invited as a sign of peace. There were cameras all along the back wall. 2 balconies had string quartets playing softly. Kang Min-jae stood at the altar in black. He was older, more difficult. The corners of his eyes had lines in them from the 3 years. His hair was still dark, and his shoulders were still broad. But he was still now in a way that wasn't peaceful. It was tiredness. The stillness of a man who had won every war he had ever fought, and was beginning to quietly suspect that he had been on the wrong side of all of them. The music got louder. The big doors at the back of the hall opened. Yoon Jia came into view, a vision in ivory silk, with her veil trailing behind her like a river. She smiled, a practiced, shining smile that showed she was going to get everything she wanted. She started to walk down the aisle. She didn't get halfway there. From the back of the hall, a small, clear, and completely fearless voice rang out. "Mommy, why does that man on stage look like my brothers?" 200 people turned their heads. The music stuttered and then stopped. There was a woman in navy at the back of the hall, framed by the open door. Her hair was dark and plain. Her face was peaceful. 2 small boys in matching dark coats stood on either side of her. In front of her, a little girl with wide, dark eyes and a head full of rebellion held her mother's hand and pointed directly at the altar. Seo Yeon-han, living. 3 kids were next to her. Min-jae stayed still. He couldn't move. For one brief second, he thought he was seeing things. He had thought about her so many times in 3 years, in so many impossible ways, that when she finally showed up, he could only stare at her like a man who sees his own ghost. After that, the ghost moved forward. She wasn't in a hurry. She didn't slow down. As she walked down the aisle with her 3 children, everyone in the Hall of Seoul's elite watched in shock. The carpet didn't make any noise when she walked on it. There was no anger on her face. She looked like a woman who had already won something, but no one knew what it was yet. Jia's smile was gone. Madame Kang, who was sitting in the front row, had turned white. Seo-yeon stopped 20 feet away from the altar. Her 3 kids stood in front of her, like little witnesses. She looked up at the man she had once loved and spoke in a voice that could be heard all over the hall. "You made me sign divorce papers while I was in the hospital," she said. "I came to give back what you left behind today." She told the kids to step forward. The hall stayed still, didn't breathe. Junseo stood with his shoulders straight and his eyes, those eyes, on the man at the altar. Min-soo held his mother's hand and kept his chin up. He was still thin from the fever, but he was steady. Harin, brave as thunder, took a step forward and looked Kang Min-jae straight in the eye, as if he were an interesting stranger who wasn't very impressive. The similarity was a knife. It was all over the place. In the way Jun Seo's jawline looked, in the way Harin's shoulders were set, and in the way Min-soo stood with his hands behind his back, unconsciously copying his father's posture at the altar. A woman in the second row gasped loudly and put her hand over her mouth. Jia got better first. Her voice was shrill in a way that it had never been before. "This is crazy. This is a stunt. Security. Security. Get this woman out of here." Seo-yeon didn't look at her. "Mrs. Kang," Jia said again, forcing her voice to be smooth again. "Whoever you are and whatever you want, the kids could be anyone's. This is a wedding. Have some respect and go." Madam Kang got up from her seat shakily and said in a low, shaky voice, "The children could belong to any man at all." Seo-yeon finally turned to look at her. She didn't say anything. She just reached into the small leather folder next to her and pulled out the first document. "Hospital records," she said, giving them to the nearest usher, who then took them to Min-jae at the altar with a pale face. 3 years ago, Seoul Grand Medical Center, ultrasound and prenatal exams for a patient named Han Seo-yeon, who is married to Kang Min-jae. She pulled out the second one. Original ultrasound, 3 heartbeats. The date on it is 4 weeks before the divorce you made me sign. She pulled out the third one, which was a small, thin tablet. "And this," she said softly, "is the video of what happened in that hospital, in that hallway, and on the marble stairs at the banquet the night I was pushed." She pushed a button. The tablet started playing through the hall's own wedding reveal screen. It was supposed to show a montage of the bride and groom, but instead, it showed a time-stamped security video of Yoon Ji-ah giving a man in a black jacket a folded envelope in a supply closet 3 years ago. The sound hissed. "The proof burns with her when she's gone." The voice of Ji-ah. No doubt about it. There was a low, horrible murmur in the hall. The senators asked their aides for help. People at the back wall started talking quietly into their phones. A camera in the third row moved its focus from the bride to the woman in navy and didn't move back. Jia's face was completely pale. She opened her mouth. She shut it. She stepped back, and the hem of her gown caught on her heel. Min-jae hadn't moved. He was looking at the ultrasound in his hand, at the 3 little circles, at the time written in the corner. 3 years late at the truth. Jun Seo, who was quiet and observant, took a step forward and looked up at the man he had only seen in a magazine. His voice was soft but clear. "Mom," he said, "is this the guy who didn't want us?" Kang Min-jae's knees didn't give way, but something inside of him did. Then Min-soo fell down. It happened out of the blue. He was standing straight with his chin up and his small hand in his brother's. The next thing he knew, his legs gave out and he fell sideways onto the carpet. Seo-yeon was on the ground before the first gasp was over. Min-soo, Min-soo, baby, look at mommy!" The room fell apart into chaos. People who were there got up. There were a few doctors in the audience and one of them was already pushing forward. Min-jae, who was cold, awful, and untouchable, dropped the ultrasound and ran. He jumped off the altar, his coat flying, and in 4 steps he was on the floor next to Seo-yeon. He picked up his son without saying a word and was back on his feet before the doctor got there. He said to Lee Do-han, whose face had gone white, "My car. Now." At a dangerous speed, the private hospital was 6 minutes away. In 4, Min-jae drove it himself. Seo-yeon sat in the front seat with Min-soo on her lap, and the other 2 kids were quietly buckled in the back. She didn't talk to the guy who was driving. He didn't talk to her. They both couldn't. The doctors were waiting in the emergency bay. Do-han had called before. Min-soo was taken to the back within 30 seconds of arriving. Min-jae, the man who gave orders to senators, stood in the hallway with his arms hanging empty at his sides, staring at the swinging doors as if he had never known what it was like to be powerless. The head pediatrician came out in less than 10 minutes. "We need a father match," she said quickly. "HLA typing and an emergency transfusion. Are you the dad?" Min-jae spoke. Seo-yeon, who was sitting on the bench with Jun Seo and Harin pressed against her sides, spoke for him. "Yes," she said. "Yes, he is." He looked at Minjae. She didn't look back. In the hallway, they took his blood. He didn't sit down. He didn't move. He watched the vial fill with his own blood and thought, with a clarity that was almost too much to bear, that this was the first honest thing he had ever given his kids. The pediatrician came back an hour later. Match confirmed. Great compatibility. We've started treatment, and he's stable. Seo-yeon bent over and cried into her hands without making a sound. Minjae sat down on the bench, not next to her, but 3 feet away, like a man who knew he hadn't earned a closer look. He put his hands over his face. Harin, who had been watching him closely the whole time, climbed down from her mother's side, crossed the 3 feet of tile, and put her small hand on his knee. "Don't cry," she said in a serious tone. "Mommy says Minsu is strong." Minjae, the Mafia boss of Seoul, a killer of men, and the commander of empires, made a sound that was neither a sob nor a laugh. He put his hand over his daughter's. She didn't pull away. Junseo watched from behind her with those old, careful eyes, waiting, making a decision. Lee Do-han worked while Minsu slept under the monitors. He didn't sleep for 2 days. He got every record he could get his hands on. He followed the bank transfers back to the memory card. He talked to the nurse who had changed the IV 3 years ago. She had long since left the medical field, and when he pushed her, she broke down and told him everything. He found an email thread that Madame Kang and Jia's personal assistant had deleted. He found the man in the black jacket from the footage of the supply closet. He is now dead and buried 2 years later, having been killed on a job that Yoon Jia's shell company had set up. Do-han brought the file to Minjae in the hospital waiting room on the second night. Minjae read it without saying anything. After he was done, he put it down on the bench next to him and stared at the wall across from him for a long time. Then he said in a low voice, to no one in particular, "I asked her to sign while she was trying to keep our kids safe." Do-han didn't say anything. Minjae got up. He walked the whole length of the hall. He came back. He sat down. He asked, "Where is she now?" "She hasn't left the room with the boy in 2 days. And the other 2? "Sleeping on the couch in the living room. The girl is using my coat as a pillow." Minjae shut his eyes. Do-han. "Yes, boss. Get Jia arrested tonight. I want her in jail before sunrise. Use the card evidence and anything else you've added. I want the prosecutor I own to handle it. No mistakes." "And what about your mother?" Minjae didn't say anything for a long time. "She is under house arrest. Her title is taken away. Her accounts are frozen. She doesn't talk to the kids or Seo-yeon. She can't talk to anyone in my family again without my permission. If she tries to contact any of them, I will cut her off completely." "Got it." "And Do-han?" "Yes, sir. Thanks for never really believing it." Do-han bent down very low and left. At 3 in the morning, Jia was arrested in her penthouse suite, where she was still wearing makeup from the day before. She yelled. She made threats. She called on names that hadn't helped her in 10 years. Do-han watched without showing any emotion as she was taken to an unmarked car in handcuffs. At 6, the scandal broke. By noon, every Korean news channel was showing the fake evidence. Yoon Jia's name was trending on 3 different platforms by 3. By the end of the day, the shell companies she had used to pay for the first attack had been frozen, her assets had been taken, and her family had publicly disowned her. For a long time, Madame Kang didn't show up in public again. When she finally showed up months later, she was thinner, paler, and her silver hair had turned completely white. She made one attempt to go to the hospital. Minjae himself turned her away at the door. He didn't yell. He didn't make any threats. He just said, "You're not welcome near them, not while I'm alive." She didn't try again. Minsu got better slowly. The treatment worked. The blood match worked. Every week, color came back to his cheeks and strength to his small arms. By the 2nd month, he was sitting up and demanding jellies from the hospital cafeteria, with the arrogant confidence of a child who had just learned that many people loved him. Kang Min-jae came over every day. He didn't bring any flowers. He didn't bring any gifts. He brought picture books, the kind that children's librarians recommend, and he sat in the low plastic chair next to Minsu's bed and read them out loud. His voice broke and steadied and broke again. At first, he wasn't very good at it. He didn't know how to do voices. He didn't know how to hold the book so the kids could see it. Harin corrected him all the time, with the harshness that only a 3-year-old can show. The wolf shouldn't sound like a grandpa, Dad. Dad, you are reading too quickly. That page is wrong, Daddy. You already did that page. He got it. He got down on one knee to talk to them at eye level. He asked first before he touched them. He never yelled, not even when Junseo, who was always on the lookout and careful, didn't talk to him for 2 whole weeks. On the 15th day, Junseo walked up to him in the hallway and said in a very low voice, "Are you going to hurt my mom again?" Minjae slowly got down on one knee. He said, "No. Not ever. Promise. I promise." For a long time, Junseo looked at his face. It was the look of a small judge deciding a very big crime. Then he nodded once and left. That was the only time they talked that day. That was enough. In the 3rd month, Minjae signed the legal papers that made all 3 children official in a small conference room at the hospital. He set up a trust fund for each of them that could not be changed and would be managed by Seo Yeon until they turned 18. He gave her the Busan apartment she had been renting, which he bought quietly through Dohan and now owns in her name only. He signed a statement of public apology that his legal office would send out. In it, he said that the divorce was based on false evidence, cleared Han Seo-yeon of all charges, and publicly confirmed that he was the father of the triplets. He didn't ask her for anything in return. As the lawyers were putting the papers away after the signing, he looked at her across the table and said softly, "I don't deserve to ask you to come back. I just want a chance to be their father." At first, Seo-yeon didn't answer. She got all of her copies of the papers. She put them in her purse. She got up. She stopped at the door. "You can stand next to them," she said, without turning. "But you haven't earned the right to stand next to me." She went away. He spent a lot of time in the conference room. The next few months were quiet. Minsu went home, but not to Minjae's penthouse. Instead, he went to the small apartment in Busan where Seo-yeon had started over. Minjae didn't mind. He didn't even hint at anything else. Instead, he just started going down on weekends. He stayed in a hotel close by. He didn't ask to live in the apartment. He came on Saturday mornings with bags of groceries and picture books, and once, in a memorable moment, he brought a small, badly wrapped kite that Harin had asked for in a video call and that he had apparently tried to wrap himself. He brought the kids to the beach. He brought them to the aquarium. Once, he took them to a small park with a carousel. Seo-yeon sat on a bench and watched as her husband, who was also her ex-husband and the Mafia boss of Seoul, stood in line behind 3 small children holding 3 small tickets and waited for his turn to ride the carousel with them. He wasn't a natural dad, but she slowly came to see that he was a difficult father. There is a difference. He stopped wearing the long black coat when he was with them. One Saturday afternoon, Harin picked out soft gray sweaters for him at a department store. He then said, with great authority, that black was for meetings and gray was for daddies. He didn't laugh very often, but once, when Harin put a flower crown on his head and called him the king of the library, he laughed so hard that his eyes watered. Seo-yeon, who was watching from the doorway, felt something inside her that she had thought was dead move very slightly toward the light. She did not let him off the hook. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Completely. But she stopped seeing him as the guy who had left her on a hospital blanket. Instead, she started to see him as the man who was trying, one small visit at a time, to become someone worth forgiving. It happened on a Sunday night in the early fall. The triplets were almost 4 years old. Minsu was back to normal, running laps around his brother and climbing things he shouldn't have. Junseo was reading, really reading, slowly, with his finger under each word, at a level that made the librarian at Seo-yeon's job look at him with shocked respect. Harin was Harin, which means she was herself, but louder. Minjae was there for the weekend. He was going to leave in the morning. He was standing at the apartment door with his coat over his arm, saying goodbye in a formal, awkward way that he had come up with, and that the kids had come to expect. Harin was sitting on the low sofa and watching him with her head tilted. She said, all of a sudden and loudly, "Mommy, can Dad stay for dinner?" The apartment got very quiet. Min-jae, standing in the doorway, didn't move. He didn't take anything for granted. He didn't say anything. He didn't look at Seo-yeon with pleading eyes or make demands. He just stood there with his coat over his arm and waited. Seo-yeon stared at him. She was quiet for a long time. She wasn't thinking about the wedding, the hospital, or the blood on the paper. She was thinking about a man who had learned to kneel down to 3 feet tall over the course of almost a year of Saturdays. She remembered how quickly he had given blood, how the vial had filled up in a hallway while her son fought for breath in the next room. She thought about a flower crown on a dark head. "Okay," she said in a low voice, "for dinner. Not for good." Min-jae's jaw tightened, but not because he was angry. It was the same way a man's jaw tightens when he is trying very hard not to cry in front of his kids. He put the coat on the chair. He went over to the low table. He sat down on the floor across from his daughter, who smiled at him as if she had personally brought peace to the whole Korean peninsula. Seo-yeon went to the kitchen to cook the rice. She heard her son Junseo, her quiet, watchful, ancient-eyed Junseo, say in the careful, measured voice he used only for the most important things, "Dad, if you stay, you have to eat the carrots too. That's what Mommy says." And Kang Min-jae, the Mafia boss of Seoul, who had killed men and ruled empires, once threw his pregnant wife's life onto a hospital blanket and asked her to sign it away. He answered very seriously, "Yes, of course, the carrots too." Seo-yeon stood by the sink and put her hand over her mouth so the kids couldn't hear her. The light of fall slanted gold across the small apartment from outside. Inside, a family that had been torn apart on a hospital bed 4 years earlier sat down to eat rice together, carefully but not perfectly. He once made her sign a divorce on a hospital bed. Now he knew that a man like him could never force someone to love him. He would have to work for it. 1 child, 1 apology, 1 carrot, 1 dinner, and 1 day at a time.